Reading I Ching. Composition of description. Let's take a quick preview of how the description is organized for each individual hexagram. The description of a single hexagram is composed of its title and 3 different parts. Composition of title. First of all, let's look at the title of each hexagram. In this series, the name of the hexagram is written in English and Chinese characters at the header, and the 6 lines that constitutes the hexagram are drawn on one side. Yang is represented by 1 long stick, and Yin is represented by 2 short sticks. The bottom 3 and the top 3 of the lines are bundled together to create a trigram. There are 8 different trigrams, and each of them corresponds to an element of nature, such as heaven, earth, water, and fire. The name of the hexagram is generally made up of 3 or 4 Chinese characters. The first one corresponds to one of the 8 natural images of the upper trigram, and the second corresponds to the lower one. The remaining 1 or 2 characters represent the overall meaning of hexagram, which is also interpreted into the English name. For example, in this hexagram, the upper trigram consists of 2 yangs sitting above 1 yin, and it stands for wind. The first Chinese character also stands for wind. Similarly, both the lower trigram and the second Chinese character represents fire, which is a symbol in which a yin is embraced between 2 yangs. Finally, the last 2 Chinese characters, which stand for family members, implies that the overall meaning of this hexagram is related to a family. One exception to the composition of Chinese characters occurs when the 2 trigrams are of the same type. In such cases, instead of repeating the same character twice, the first letter changes to the Chinese character representing double. Composition of hexagram. There are 3 parts to the detailed description of each hexagram. Composition of the hexagram, overall meaning, and the change of each line. In the first part of the description, the composition of hexagram, the meaning of the hexagram is explained based on the natural images that correspond to the 2 trigrams. As was mentioned before, each of the 2 trigrams corresponds to a specific element in nature, such as heaven, earth, water, and fire. Each hexagram corresponds to the case where one type of element lies above the other. Thus, in this part, we will try to analyze what characteristics the natural elements have in common, or how they differ. We will also try to think of an image in which one element lies above the other, and see how the combination of those elements can be harmonized, by interacting with each other. It is not easy to memorize the names and meanings of all 64 hexagrams from scratch. However, it would help you understand the characteristics of the hexagrams better, if you try to find an image of nature in which the 2 natural elements interacts, and then connect such an image to the overall meaning of the hexagram. Overall meaning. In the next part, overall meaning, we will try to interpret the meaning of the hexagram using various methods. First, we may try to consider deeper into the interaction of natural elements, or we may sometimes compare it with the preceding hexagram. We may also analyze the organization of the hexagram, based on the relationships and interactions of the 6 yin-yang lines, or we may want to find other hexagrams with similar or opposite composition. While we will try to define the overall meaning of the hexagram based on many different approaches, but of course we cannot deal with every possible ways to interpret the hexagram. It will only make the description longer and redundant. We will select and focus on a few methods that seem appropriate for the interpretation of the given hexagram. I think it may also help you understand the meaning of a hexagram more clearly and less ambiguously, if we compare the hexagram with other ones with similar meaning, composition, or shape, instead of interpreting a single hexagram within itself. Change of lines. The third and final part is the change of lines. According to the way of picking out the hexagram, we first selected one hexagram, observed the change of the 6 lines to get the second hexagram, and determined a hexagram or line to focus on based on the number of lines that have changed. The explanation for each line in this part, change of lines, is the one you consult to, when you end up with a specific line. In this part, the explanation always starts from the bottom line and moves up toward the top. Note that the name of the hexagram starts from the upper trigram and end with the lower one, where the order of the lines is always counted from bottom to top. Each line, however, does not convey an independent meaning. This series tries to relate the interpretation of each line to the overall meaning of the hexagram. And as we go from the bottom to top, we are going to create a short story that is coherently connected throughout the lines, and the description of each line will correspond to a sequential phase of the story. There are a few factors that can be considered in order to interpret the meaning of lines. As mentioned, of course, we will take into account the overall meaning of the hexagram. Conversely, we will also consider whether each line is yin or yang. It is often said that yang is a power to start a new objective, while yin is the power to keep it going. They can also be considered to be other pairs of concepts. Inside and out, self and others, advance and retreat, challenge and rest, individual and whole, effort and luck, and so on. In addition, the position of the line matters. Often, the bottom half of the hexagram stands for the reality, while the upper half stands for the ideal. Sometimes it may be better to interpret them as present and future as well. We generally say that the first bottom line is at the starting position, the second is in the middle of reality, and the third is at one step further from the current reality, or it may be interpreted as the right time to prepare for the beginning of a new ideal. The fourth is the time to charge toward the new ideal, the fifth is in the middle of the ideal situation, and the final sixth and topmost line stands for the overall conclusion, and the implication that we will move on to the next state. In addition to this, we also try to interpret the relationship between adjacent lines, and occasionally we correlate the upper three lines with the lower ones, and see how they interact with each other. For example, the bottom lines may represent different levels of realistic problem, and the top ones represent alternative possibilities or solutions. Again, we do not consider all those possible interpretation methods at once. We will select the most appropriate method, that enables us to explain the meaning of lines, that corresponds well to the characteristics and overall meaning of the hexagram, and also to the original document of I Ching. In fact, I will not depend on the original text too much. I may change the traditional meaning to some extent, in order to make the story more logical and coherent, and in some cases I may completely ignore some of the meanings at all. Keep in mind that this series may not be an accurate explanation of the authentic text of I Ching. This series mainly aims to provide simple and coherent interpretation of hexagrams, so that those who has interest in I Ching may get acquainted with the general concept easily.